We are thrilled to have a special guest with me right here in the Terracotta Room today, Florida Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Nikki Fried. Nikki Fried was elected in 2018. She was the state's only statewide elected Democrat, been for the past 4 years. When this episode of Deeper Dive comes out, she will be on her way out the door as Ag Commissioner. So she is doing our podcast with us as one of her final appearances as Ag Commissioner.
I do regret that we were not able to really find a way to rise above some of the partisan bickering and figure out how to not make the pandemic political, how to make sure that we really were working together on so many issues that I think that we could have done good for the people of our state and shown the rest of the country that there is a way for D's and R's to work together.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara Cam. That's me. Today, I have a special guest in the Terracotta Room, right here in the Terracotta Room with me. That is Florida Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Nikki Fried.
I am so happy to be here, Dara.
Well, I'm excited to have you. We caught Nikki Fried. This will come out in the first weekend in January, and we caught Nikki Fried on her way out the door. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this with us while you're still in office.
Of course. I'm excited that you are starting to do these podcasts.
Yeah, me too. Watch out, world. You're creating a monster here. Okay, kids, we're going to take a deep dive into loads of fun stuff today. Some of my beats and your beats. Guns, weed. Let's dig right in. You know, your departure from the cabinet, a little seriousness to start off with. Although maybe I should, I don't know, maybe start it off lighter, but let's start it off the way I feel like it.
It's all you.
Hey, that's my mantra. It's always about me. Your departure from the cabinet will leave Florida without a single statewide elected Democrat.
Yep.
You've been a perpetual thorn in the side of Governor Ron DeSantis during your 4 years in office. What has it been like for you to be? See, it's not so boring.
Not so boring.
What's it been like for you to be the only Democrat on the cabinet, and kind of like a Horton Hears a Who there?
Yeah, it's ups and downs. When I first got elected, well, first of all, let's go back. In 2018, when I was the only one that got across the finish line, I did not expect to be the only statewide elected Democrat. For those who have known me for a long time, I've always carried the banner of issues that were important, but I've never been necessarily involved in Democratic politics. And so I had this new responsibility that I didn't run for, and that's being the only statewide.
Right.
And so I was sitting in a situation where I recognized that I didn't win because I was this, Democrat for decades that, went out there and was an activist on issues and made my way through running for city commission, then county commission. And that wasn't how I got here.
Right.
And so I knew I had to kind of have that balance of recognizing that I had a lot of NPA and a lot of crossover Republican support. But yet I also knew that I had to be a checks and balances, and recognizing that I was the only statewide as an independent elected member of the cabinet. But I kind of went in, and I think that everybody knows I knew Jimmy from his time in the legislature. Obviously, everybody knows I've known Ashley since undergrad in law school, and then we both practiced law together at the same firm and then in Jacksonville, so I've known her forever, and really thought this was going to be an opportunity to show the rest of the country that Democrats and Republicans can work together.
Wah, wah.
Right. I have never been so wrong in my entire life. But we did. I mean, we went to Israel together. Every time, Ron came to my position on the Groveland 4, came to my position on smokable flour, came to my position on environmental issues. And so I said, okay, well, maybe this is going to be an opportunity to do some stuff good. And then as more and more time went on, towards really the latter part of 2019 was the first time I walked out of a cabinet meeting when I believed the whole cabinet had violated sunshine laws and had appointed somebody that it was a 3-second interview and appointment process, which there's no way that if they had not previously discussed this appointment that it would have gone by so fast. And then it kind of went downhill from there. And from him taking my Office of Energy, trying to take the Office of Energy in 2020, the Republicans trying to strip my entire budget for consumers because of the sticker gate.
Oh, right. Yeah. Let's remind listeners about that. Right.
So this is actually kind of funny. So when every commissioner of agriculture comes in and you have to change the sticker. So that is part of our job. It costs like $5,000, but that's part of it when our inspectors go back through the gas stations and they inspect the pumps, you change the sticker. It is kind of protocol. Every commissioner of agriculture designs their own stickers. So we changed the design of the sticker and put my face on the picture. So that went up and the Republicans lost their minds.
They did. It caused a shit show.
A complete shit show. Yeah. And I kept saying to you all realize you're giving me a lot of PR for this. A lot of free earned media, but okay. So much so that they came in and actually changed and put proviso language in my budget that required that we weren't allowed to print new stickers so we were just using our old stickers. Well, that wasn't enough for Jose Oliva. And
he's the former Speaker of the House.
Right. He wanted the stickers actually off and changed. And so in the 2020 legislative session, because the stickers had not been changed, we just didn't print new ones. Again, we're supposed to be fiscally conservative, so why print new ones and have our staff go right back out and change the stickers? And so they had threatened to actually zero fund my entire consumer affairs budget until they were changed.
I'm not going to say petty, but...
Woo. Don't we have other things to be worrying about?
You can say it.
And like, it's absolutely insane. Meanwhile, every other elected official puts their pictures on their stationery. And I mean, Ron's face is everywhere, but God forbid, a Democrat does it. It's a...
So I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were saying that it went downhill.
It went downhill really fast, and even becoming part of it, and of course COVID hit, and we were doing the research on what it was like and what was happening in California and Oregon, because we always were knowing that we were about 2 weeks behind where California and Oregon and the West Coast were doing. And so I called Ron. I called his chief of staff at the time because I wanted to have the conversation. What's the game plan here? Again, we're all members of the cabinet.
Did you take your calls?
No, did not take my calls. Right. Did not take my call. Shane didn't take my call. And so we had no choice but to start putting forth our own messaging on COVID, because he had said nothing. Right. He was completely dormant.
It was very quiet at the top of COVID.
Yep.
And then there was one approach, which now he is completely reversed on. I mean, now they're doing this anti-vaxxing.
Yep. And that's kind of where everything started to deteriorate, that they put me into a corner. He then refused to put me on the reopening task force. And then that was that. And the relationship just completely continued to deteriorate more and more afterwards.
It's interesting because I remember looking at pictures of, the fair, when the members of the cabinet and the governor used to go down the slide together.
Yep.
And they would have pictures together.
Not once did that happen. Yeah. I went down the slide every single year, but they did not come down with me. And the governor didn't even really show up. He showed up for the first fair, for a little bit of the opening ceremonies and the governor's lunch. Did not come to the following two, and then only showed up to the governor's lunch to give his keynote speech and then left.
Well, that's a little bit of inside dish there for kids about the relationship between Nikki Fried and Governor DeSantis, although we have seen it play out in the newspapers and on print and on TV. the governor, I asked my colleagues if they had any questions for you. And one of them said,
And you're not going to tell me who it is, so I can't
no,
go back.
I absolutely am not. Does she consider it fair criticism that she should have spent more time running the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services than countering DeSantis? After the primary, DeSantis said, this is a quote, "She's used her time to basically try to smear me on a daily basis. That's all she does. And she attacked me for taking my wife to chemotherapy, which was a new low. So that's the road she's taken." That was what Governor Ron DeSantis had to say to you after Charlie Crist defeated you in the primary.
Not a fair criticism by any stretch of imagination. This department over the 4 years has done more than any previous commissioner. And every single day, the department has been functioning. The things that we were able to accomplish over the last 4 years is astronomical. Every single one of my divisions, above and beyond, everything from tackling more of the food insecurity, to dealing with weapons licensing, to the creation of an entire new industry. We created an entire industry.
Hemp, kids.
Right. I created an entire industry. Every single, I can go through. We can go through, and let's also not forget, we had 5 hurricanes and a pandemic in the interim. And so I am very proud of
a lot
of the work that we did inside the department. And it's kind of unfair criticism, like that I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. That just because my Twitter which takes a whopping 30 seconds to put out a tweet, but the work that we do on the commissioner side and the department side, if you ask anybody from the industry, they will say, wow, that's what a commissioner of agriculture should do. When going to Washington, D.C., I've testified in front of Congress protecting agriculture, protecting our forest lands when we had to get Michael recovery dollars to the panhandle. I mean, every single day. And when the governor's talking about, as far as, I didn't criticize him for taking her, that's insane. What I criticized him for was that he went MIA in the end of December of last year, of 2021, during the height of the pandemic. And he went MIA for 2 weeks. His own team put out false pictures that had been taken months earlier. They had 4 different stories. The governor was on vacation. The governor was working on a vaccine rule. I don't even know what. He came up with 4 separate excuses of where he was for those 2 weeks. And then finally, when he was getting so much criticism, and this isn't the time when I called him out that we had 1 million COVID tests that were about to expire. They called me a liar. They said I didn't know what I was talking about. And that's when this whole thing was going on. To then at the end of it, his last statement was that he was with his wife. And I didn't say a single thing after that.
Right.
But he lied for 2 weeks about his location. If he had been with her and Casey at Moffitt or whoever else, just say that. But he didn't say that. He covered it up, called me a liar. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, I was proven right that we had 1 million COVID tests that expired.
This relationship between the two of you and the animosity, on the plaza level sort of seems like a reflection of what's going on at the national level. We know he's got, we believe he has national aspirations. He certainly is behaving as though he does. But enough about Governor DeSantis. Let's talk about you, or let's talk about me. Right? What did you learn from your primary loss? Any takeaways, any big takeaways from that? Any political lessons?
I think the greatest couple, I learned a lot. I think that a couple of them is name ID in a state like Florida matters. That I was running against somebody who had 30 years in the business, that I was unwilling to make promises of positions and I wasn't going to do that. And that cost me a lot of endorsements and the recognition that those relationships of 30 years in the business go a lot further than I had anticipated. And just because you've done a lot of good work, that unfortunately in Florida, Democratic politics doesn't mean anything.
Well, the folks I spoke to, activists, a lot of folks just, to me, what they were saying was that they were backing Charlie because they thought that he had the better chance of defeating DeSantis. I mean, we see how that went. He lost by 20 percentage points, which is the biggest trouncing that a Democrat has had in Florida in 30 years.
Yep.
I mean, did you get a lot of that too?
I did, and I got into a lot of fights. A lot of people that I thought would have been in my corner, the people that I'd either worked with the last 4 years or even people I had known even prior to that. And they said, we think that he's got the best shot because for whatever reason, that he has name ID and has an ability to raise money. And I said to every single person I spoke to, if we elect Charlie Crist as our nominee, it will be the greatest loss Democrats will have ever seen in the state of Florida. And they continue to say, we don't agree with you. We see the numbers. He's going to pull in the Democrats and he'll get independents and he'll get Republicans who don't like Ron. And I said, this is not going to happen. Look at the 2014 numbers.
Right.
Look at 2014. And that's just not going to be the case. And he's going to take down the down ballots. And I hate that I was proven right, but here we are.
Yeah. I mean, that, it does say something about Democrats in Florida, though, don't you think,
Yeah.
Nikki, that they're pinned their hopes on someone who used to be a Republican and who had, you didn't even need to make up false flyers. You could have him endorsing, the NRA. You could have him
Pro-life.
Right, pro-life. You could. So I mean, it always was kind of perplexing to me that that's the best Democrats could do. I'm not saying Charlie ain't a nice guy. I'm not saying that. I've known him since he was in the state Senate, but do you know what I mean? Like
It was frustrating. It was definitely frustrating because I felt like I did everything right.
Yeah.
You heard the beginning part of this interview that I walked in not wanting to be I wasn't running to be the only statewide elected, but then I was in this position. And I actually, and I'm going to do a shout out to Mary Ellen Klaus, after our first, I think it was our first Capitol News, every year we always do I'm forgetting the exact title of it, but all the press day. And so all the press.
Oh, the AP has a annual legislative right before the start of the legislative session. The AP legislative session, yeah.
And I guess this was the beginning part. One of I don't remember, it was 2019. I think it was probably 2020, and she was really hard on me in that. So basically, all of the press corps comes up here, and leadership from both chambers and the cabinet all have their 30 minutes basically in the hot seat.
Yeah,
and she was really hard on me. And our comms team afterwards called her and was like, what was that all about? And she's like, she's the only statewide Democrat. She's got to be tougher on the Republicans. And kind of like I stepped back. It was the first time that I was like, okay, I guess I have a different role that I have to play here. And so I had done everything right. I had held, the environmental stuff we moved the ball forward on, protecting of consumers to legalizing of hemp. I mean, every single facet. There was not one thing. And in fact, I carried the ball on a lot of things that were not even in my wheelhouse. I didn't have to talk about COVID.
Right.
That was not in my wheelhouse. All these other things dealing with...
Weed too. That wasn't in your wheelhouse. I mean, it could have been, but not so much, right?
Yeah. I mean, there were certain aspects of it, but I looked at it from a consumer protection aspect. And so I had done all these things right. I had known all the legislators. I had been there. And all of a sudden, it's just like we think this guy who has done this before is our best shot. And I kept not understanding that you've got a guy like Ron who motivated his base in 2018, whether it was him or Trump, the same thing, and Andrew motivated our base that if we're
Andrew Gillum for people who he is so yesterday's right.
But at the time, he motivated the base, and I'm sitting here going, if we're going to have a shot to beat a powerful incumbent, we've got to make sure that we're presenting a complete opposite of what Ron is, and to motivate the base and to give something for people to vote for. Something new. That was my tagline.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the fact that we were getting such pushback, and I kept saying, I'm telling you guys, if Charlie is our candidate, we're not going to get money from the national people. And I know that that was written about, and Charlie's people flipped out. And unfortunately, I knew what I was talking about, and no one listened. And unfortunately, right now, we are in a situation where, the biggest things that got the rest of the country out of a red wave was, one, they counted on women on the abortion issue, and the younger generation came out and voted because of where things were, whether it was gay rights or voting rights or the Black community. And we didn't present that to the Democrats here. And so the things that motivated in every other state, we presented the exact opposite.
We went the other way.
Yep.
I mean, we really are much redder. I've been joking, please now can the rest of the national press stop saying Florida is no longer a purple state, because I don't think Florida was really purple after 2020, to be honest. I think we have been trending red for a lot longer than what the national media seems to believe.
Yeah, but I also think, Dara, that it was complete meltdown of the Democrats all across the board. Because I'm not going to give, yes, we had a powerful incumbent that had a lot of money, that had a platform that he was running on, which was the culture wars and COVID. But the Democrats, we just folded. Like there was everything that could have gone wrong, went wrong, whether it was a lack of voter registration of the last 4 years, really since Hillary, that we had no grassroots, we had no door knocking, we had no infrastructure, we had no communication between House victory and Senate victory and the congressionals and the top of the ticket. There was no coordinated. There was nothing. And then we had candidate that didn't motivate the base. So it was a Republican win, but it was more of a Democrat failure.
That's interesting that you would say that. I've been talking to Democrats for many, many years, and you always say, if we turn out, we win. It's all about turnout. And I keep hearing, we're going to knock on this many doors, we're going to do this. And that lack of coordination was really noticeable, I think, this year more than in previous elections.
Yeah, I mean, we started seeing it in 2020, because of COVID, where Republicans really had an opportunity because they didn't believe COVID existed. And so they still knocked on doors, they still were interacting with their constituents, and Democrats didn't. And so we lost ground because part of, which is what Democrats were always so good at, is that grassroots, is that door knocking, is that persuasive conversation. And when 2020, we didn't do any of that. So we had a lot of work to make up from 2020. And we should have overperformed on the knocking of the doors and the communications, and that just didn't happen.
So what's next for you? I know you're involved in this abortion, the constitutional amendment. And then I want to talk about some of the things that you have accomplished during your tenure. And again, thank you for joining me today.
Of course.
What do you have up your sleeve?
A couple of things. First off, we started the Won't Back Down PC right after the primary for really two purposes. One is to help the down ballots, because that was what I was preaching all throughout the primary, that it's, so many people in the Democratic Party always talks about if the top of the ticket wins, so does everybody else. And I've always had a different approach, that it has to be the bottom of the ticket up, because the bottom of the ticket is the one who, I'm talking about the House, the Senate candidates, the city, county commissioners, even the cabinet, are the ones who are going to more organizing events, are going to the communities. And so I knew that support was not going to be there from the coordinated. And so we wanted to make sure we were elevating voices that were being left behind. So we worked on about 25 different campaigns where I did press conferences with them, did call time, did door knocking, did events with them. And so that was through Won't Back Down, and gave donations, and then also started working on the constitutional amendment. And so that's kind of going to be sort of my brand as the generality going forward. Working on some other things as far as, we have a 2024 election coming up. Want to make sure that we are in a right position, not just here in Florida, but more importantly across the country at this point. Using my voice, my knowledge of Ron DeSantis to help national Democrats if he so happens to decide to run and, God forbid, gets through the primary, what that looks like in a general election for president in 2024. So kind of some of those conversations, and I've been reached out to a lot of the individuals in agriculture who may want to get into actually the cannabis space, both for the medical program as well as for whether it's the CBD or hemp side of things in the industrial. So I'm going to kind of be doing some of that stuff, maybe advising and being consultants of some of those while I kind of figure out how to help Florida Democrats without being the head of the party.
Okay, well, a lot to unpack there. I wanted to ask a little bit about that constitutional amendment that would enshrine in the state constitution a right to abortion. I don't know. I'm sorry, I wrote it down and I can't find it, but that who would be the main supporter of that kind of an endeavor?
It's going to, right now, there's a very broad coalition, really kind of anchored by Planned Parenthood.
Right.
But it's going to be a lot of different organizations that have been doing, like the Women's of Southwest Florida's Voices, or there's an organization down there. My organization, there's a couple others that have popped up across the state. So there's a lot of people that are involved in that. There's individuals that are past Supreme Court justices, individuals that have been involved in other previous constitutional amendments. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a very broad coalition. And right now it's getting through because, as we know, the Republicans have made it every single cycle. It's more difficult to get it on the ballot.
It's spendy too, Nikki.
Yep.
You're talking about maybe like
tens of millions.
I was going to say like $40-50 million if you really want to win it.
Yeah, and it's not an issue that has to be as educated on because
it's true.
If you had like the amendments dealing with solar or the amendments dealing with gaming, those are a little bit more complicated to unravel for the general electorate. But abortion rights are much easier to digest and to understand. So
you don't really have to persuade people on that either.
Right. But here's going to be the tricky part. One is the language, because right now is the internal debate saying, okay, do we do it on, viability versus a certain amount of weeks?
Right.
That's a conversation because the viability is a moving target as medicine and science changes. And then there's a conversation about gender issues that can go into it. And here's going to be the other problem that people aren't really wrapping their heads around. We could do everything right. We can get the language, we can get the coalition together, we can get it passed through the Supreme Court, which is a very big obstacle these days. Get it onto the ballot. Everything is perfect. And a week before the deadline of constitutional amendments going into the ballot, the supermajority of the House and Senate can pass their own version. That could be a heartbeat, which is 6 weeks, or something in the middle, and we could have conflicting ballot initiatives. And the Republicans, as we know, has more financial resources and can confuse the heck out of the electorate. And either both could pass, one could pass, neither could pass because the electorate is just confused.
I hadn't really thought about that scenario because the legislature has the ability to put its own constitutional amendments on the ballot, and they don't have to undergo the same kind of scrutiny.
Correct.
That the ones that the citizens, what are called the citizens initiatives, face too. So, well, then you're going to be, you've got some spicy stuff coming up for you. We'll be right back with Nikki Fried.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to a Deeper Dive with Dara. Let's talk about I like to talk about weed. It's one of the things I've been writing about. You were a medical marijuana lobbyist. You're also an attorney before you were elected. You mentioned the hemp industry, but you filed a lawsuit against the Biden administration because your office also oversees concealed carry permits. So there's a little nexus there between guns and weed, not just in Dara's brain. But maybe you can tell us how those things overlap and what happened there.
Yeah. So I was consistently, and I'm sure everybody in the marijuana space has the same conversation on a pretty normal basis. Is the conversation, can I have my concealed weapons permit? At the same time, I can have my medical marijuana card in the state of Florida. And I was hearing that all throughout the campaign, that Commissioner Putnam's office had been silent. There had been no response from the office of, a direction one way or the other. So I made it very clear on the campaign trail. I'd read the statutes, because there's a big difference between the ATF forms that are coming out of Washington, D.C. that have to deal with the gun purchasing and the statutory concealed carry permits. And I saw reading the language, and I didn't see a conflict between having your concealed weapons permit and having your medical marijuana card. In fact, I've made it very public that I have both.
Right.
The issue comes with you purchasing a gun, because the ATF form, and I don't know the exact date, but over the last 10 years has changed. That there is a question, I think it's like 10 Echo, that says, are you under the influence of, or take, or have access to a controlled substance, or an illegal substance, something of that nature. And they've added an asterisk on there that says, even if your state has a medical or legalization program, it's still federally illegal, and you have to say yes to this question.
Right.
So it prevents somebody like me, who would be a responsible gun owner, from purchasing a firearm. And so we have been doing kind of the legal analysis of this for the last couple of years, and saw that there is a huge conflict, a huge conflict between, it's in our state constitution, and the right to bear arms is in the federal constitution. So you have a conflict there, but you also have signals coming out from the Department of Justice and from the from Congress that says that the Department of Justice can't use, from the Rohrabacher Amendment, that you can't use financial resources to go after marijuana users or doctors and companies.
So you've got this kind of gray, muddy area, and you filed a lawsuit saying, we need to figure this out.
Yep.
And that case, the judge ruled against you, and now that's under appeal at the 11th Circuit.
That's correct.
So you're going to pursue that, I imagine, after you leave office, right?
Yeah, it's a Fried versus Garland.
Yes.
So that's kind of get to walk out of this office, hopefully making some actual real law after all of this is said and done. But the issue, why we saw this is kind of a wedge issue, because we all know from those of us who've been involved in the activist space that we haven't been seeing movement in Washington, D.C. And so we kept trying to figure out how do we move this ball forward. The Democrats are all on the same page. We need to legalize. Yes, there's issues, whether it's safe banking, whether it's expungement, reparations, what that looks like from the Democratic side. But we were not able to get enough Republican support in the Senate. So I kind of figured this might be one of those issues that maybe wakes up the Republicans and say, wait, we got a real problem here. Our people can't buy guns. And hopefully this would be a way to protect medical marijuana patients, but also a real way to move the ball forward in a practical, not just everybody wants to quote unquote get high, but a real practical situation. But
are you surprised at the Republicans' attitude towards this? Because I'm not, I want to say I'm surprised by our Florida state legislature's attitudes towards marijuana. This is an issue. I'm a patient, you're a patient, that cuts across all demographics, all nonpartisan. You go to a waiting room and you sit in there when you go to either to the doctor or to a dispensary, and you see a rainbow. You see, and I don't mean that people might
gender.
Right. Right. It is just soup to nuts.
Yep.
And I just think that this legislature doesn't get it, that this is not, they have this reefer madness mentality they just can't let go of. Or is that just my perception?
No, I think that's accurate. And I think that it's right. It doesn't make any sense, because we know that 70+% voted for, that's not just Democrats.
Right.
And I have complete confidence that people voted for me as an NPA and Republicans because of my marijuana position. And it's really...
Yeah, we're sitting here in the Terracotta Room, and I've got the T-shirt here with Nikki's picture on it. Nikki Fried will legalize weed. Just doing a little shout out to you and your merch.
Yeah, but it's astonishing, and across the country too. This is really the last of the issues. I think environment will eventually get there, but this is the last of the issues that really transcends partisan politics.
But it doesn't. I mean, they're not passing the banking bill. They're not endorsing REC.
Because here's what the situation is, that your senators are not reflective of the people. Right. I mean, that's true. Look, let's just take our own state, for example. Okay. We've got Rick, who, I mean, we all know Rick Scott. Rick Scott has always been anti-marijuana. I mean, we know that from when we first was working on this in 2016, 17. He was anti, did everything humanly possible to prevent the expansion of the industry. When I was lobbying, both as a lobbyist and as my official position, Marco, I couldn't get Marco to even meet with me on the issue. And he should be on the banking side of things on more of, and I couldn't, but I'm not even just going to take the two of them. I said the same thing to Senator Nelson. When Senator Nelson was there, I said, listen, Senator, this is an issue that your people in your state want. I need your help. I couldn't get him to sign off on a letter in 2018 dealing with the regulatory financial side of things. So this happens to be that we have a lot of U.S. senators, D and R, that just don't listen to the people of their states.
That's interesting. It's interesting. What do you think about the way that the state's medical marijuana industry has unfolded since the constitutional amendment passed in 2016?
There's a lot of frustrations still. The products are still too expensive because we know that we're still vertically integrated, which means that if you are a license holder, and we only have 22, and I know we're that 23rd Pigford, and we can go into whole soapbox on that one.
We'll have you back for that.
But that there's 22. I think maybe one, if not two, are actually making profits.
Right. There's a lot of money being transacted, but there's not a lot of net revenue. Right.
Which would allow them to start to reduce the cost to the patients. You still have that every 270 days, you got to go back to your doctor.
It's ridiculous.
You still have, they just passed telehealth, but you still have these huge regulatory oversights that are causing still the products to be very expensive. And if you look at the 22 license holders, besides Cookies, which is one of the newer ones that have bought into Florida, we have no minority-owned licenses. You have, and because it's vertical, you can't have minorities involved in the different levels. And I was actually watching last night, so if anybody wants a history of this industry, it's called Greener. The Grass is Greener. Grass is Greener. It was a documentary on kind of how we got here, and it started all back into the jazz era. And talking about how the jazz musicians of, back in the day were, even they were rapping, they were singing about this. Right. And so how that came to be. And then the jazz bars were a lot of like more hip white people would come to. And so now the white people were concerned that the black people were giving them the marijuana.
That's where the reefer madness thing came
Correct.
in. It was rooted in racism, actually.
100%. Yeah. And they were even showing through that where the cannabis first came into ports was in Louisiana, where the jazz industry was, and in Mexico, which is then associated with how we got to marijuana as opposed to cannabis, because it was going after the Mexicans. And so going through all of this, that
shout out to Cheech and Chong there.
Right. And how many people, as a past public defender, have been actually harmed because of this plant. And so now the fact that we're getting to a legalization and getting to medical program, these communities that have been targeted and been put into jail, have really harmed their communities, are not being part of the industry. And there's no conversation of how to fix that. And I'm very concerned that if there's new applications that go out, how does somebody come into this market and compete with True Leaf?
Well, you have to get deep pockets to fund you. That is really the only way to do it. We did have Kim Rivers on here a couple months ago. She didn't say this, but I'm saying I've been writing about this for ages, as you know. That's when we first met, actually. So you have to have wealthy investors or many investors, people who are capitalizing these. Again, this is about a $50 million endeavor to get up and running in Florida.
Dara, if you want to create actually be able to compete, you're talking about hundreds of millions at this point. To be able to, have your cultivation sites, be able to grow them out, be able to deal with the regulatory oversight. And let's also not forget this, the Office of Medical Marijuana Use, which is under Department of Health, which is under the governor, consistently keeps changing the rules.
Yeah.
And so it's confusing to the doctors, it's confusing to the patients, whether it's changing of the dosing to the THC caps to, how this is packaged and how that is packaged. And unless you're willing to, say, I'm going to ask for forgiveness and not permission, you're stuck in a situation where you've got a tremendously large regulatory overhead.
Yeah, we could spend a whole hour on just weed, but I will say that you have, as a statewide official, you have owned that space ever since you were elected. And what's your favorite kind of product? I'm a gummy girl.
I'm a chocolate girl.
Chocolate. Okay. Well, diabetes, chocolate.
Yes.
That's the gummies.
Well, because I have such a sweet tooth, but I try not to indulge on a normal basis. So like my only indulgence is on chocolates.
Got it. Okay. Oh, I wanted to finish up with the guns issue.
Yes.
You've been a really strong proponent of, finish up with on my end, and then I want you to just riff. A really strong proponent of a ban on assault weapons, and yet at the same time, gun owner, gun user, and your office handles the concealed carry permits. I remember during your campaign said that you kicked the NRA out of your office. You've been crossed swords with them. What did you do, and where do you think we are as a state on the gun situation? Now the legislature there's a speculation that they are going to pass a law that says you don't need to have a permit in order to carry a concealed weapon, which is very controversial. But you tell me what's going on with guns in the gunshine state. Gunshine state.
It's interesting. This was never, until I decided to run in 2018, this was never my issue. I grew up with guns. My dad, as everybody knows, is a diehard Republican. As I was, doing pride parades in high school, he was sending me NRA T-shirts. So I grew up, and it just was not part of controversy for me until February of 2018. And, having at the time, lived in Broward and saw what happened at Parkland, and spent a lot of time with the family members, listening to their stories. And
it was hard. I was here for that too. It was really, really hard.
Really hard, and impacted so many people that I knew.
Yeah, you're from that neck of the woods.
Right. And hearing even from my sister who lives in Palm Beach County, her fear of dropping off my niece and nephew to school, and hearing from so many teachers and family members that were this was now an emotional reaction to so many. And so then I also, at the same time, we were hearing that Commissioner Putnam had allowed for 13 months background checks to lapse in the concealed program. And so as I'm running for this position, I'm all of a sudden thrust into this debate that I didn't ask for, but knew that I had to kind of take my own personal experiences and say, okay, what can I do as commissioner to make it safer? Again, I have a gun. I have, a concealed permit. I go to ranges. I understand what it means to have a gun in the household and to have safety protocols and to make sure you're safe storage. And I knew that I had to figure out how to make my office do better. And part of that was the NRA had a lot of influence inside the office. That if somebody had been denied, Marion Hammer or somebody from her team would call into the department. They have a lot of control of releasing of the money from the trust fund.
Right.
It's the only trust fund in the entire state of Florida that in statute says cannot be rated by the legislature. If that tells you anything about the power of the NRA here in the state of Florida. And so we walked in and I said to my team, I said, we got to fix this. So we cleaned house. The NRA has no part of my department whatsoever, no communication. And we put somebody in the office that was past law enforcement. Stephen who happens to be Gwen Graham's husband, Stephen Herm. And we worked around the clock because here was the other interesting aspect, that under Commissioner Putnam, there's a 90-day statutory requirement that you're supposed to review all of the applications by 90 days.
That's also thanks to Marion Hammer.
Right. And there was supposed to be something that after 90 days, Adam was trying to get into statute, which is he pulled back because it's right after Parkland, that is an automatic if you haven't received something from the department.
Oh.
And so we got in there.
That's kind of a DOA thing too, I think. Yeah.
Right. And we got in there and we realized why he wanted that so much, because most of his applications were outside that 90 days. So my team literally worked 24/7. We had shifts going throughout the night and the mornings, catching up on the backlog. And we caught up. And so much so we caught up that we reduced the wait time 98%. So if you have no issues with your background checks, you are getting your permits within 2 to 5 days. And if you had an issue, it was within 22 days, depending on your getting back to us and getting us the appropriate paperwork.
Right.
Obviously, that changed a little bit during the pandemic. Things got back, and of course, applications went through the roof. I think we saw a 400% increase in applications under my term.
We have almost 3 million. I remember when Adam Putnam held a press conference to announce that we had 1 million, and we have over 2.7 million now.
And so it was, but as more and more shootings were happening over the last 4 years, and everybody always puts out the hearts and my thoughts and prayers, and I remember it was the weekend of the double shooting that was happened in Ohio and in Texas that weekend. And my team said, here's our tweet about this. And I lost it on them. I said, I don't want to tweet about this anymore. Let's find solutions. And so we went through our department and said, what else can we do to make it more safe? What are some other loopholes that we have? And so we worked through with at the time, Representative Javier Fernandez, on trying to put some legislation together, on trying to get rid of some of the loopholes that were inside the department. Of course, that bill didn't go anywhere. But it's been a balance. And I have to be honest, I was not there in 2018 on assault weapons. Because I always believe you got to go deeper. It's a deeper conversation. It's not just about the weapon.
Where are you now?
Well, I have said consistently that I would ban it because...
That's what I thought I saw you tweeting and supporting.
I have, and I've evolved on that based on what I have seen over the last 4 years. That the data that shows, that when it was banned nationally, the decrease in usage of those and the decreasing of the violence and deaths associated with it, and then seeing that all these mass shootings have one thing in common. Yeah. And that's the specific weapon that is used. Can they come back and build a bomb and throw a bomb into a school? I mean, if somebody's got a depraved heart and mind, they're going to find a way. But why give them the tools and make it easy for them?
Let's wrap up, and I'll ask you a question, then you can talk about whatever you want. Do you have any regrets? Is there anything that you wish you'd done differently?
I mean, I do. The biggest regret is that the cabinet couldn't work together. It actually breaks my heart because there's a lot of things that probably...
They stopped even meeting.
They stopped meeting.
You're not even meeting anymore. I mean, that seemed a little crazy to me. How many meetings have you had this year?
2. And 1 clemency. And so that's been, I think, my biggest regret is trying to... And I tried. I had people that were lobbyists that were close to Ron. I had Republicans that were close to Ron that said, listen, Nikki may wear another jersey. You guys are not always going to get along, but there's going to be things that you can work together on. And I tried. I mean, even the beginning part of 2020, as you heard, I called him 3 times prior to when the pandemic was unfolding. I called him beginning part of January. This is a remarkable story. So beginning part of January, when he was coming after my Office of Energy, I called him up and said, hey, why don't we sit down and talk? I don't think you understand what this entails and what you're trying to do here. Let's have a meeting and let's just kind of talk. And he's like, sure. Just have your team, reach out to mine and let's set it up. So my team reached out to his and said, hey, Commissioner Fried would really like some time with the governor. What is this in regards to? And my team's like, she's a member of the cabinet. Who cares? And we never were able to get a meeting on the books.
Wow.
So I do regret that we were not able to really find a way to rise above some of the partisan bickering and figure out how to not make the pandemic political, how to make sure that we really were working together on so many issues that I think that we could have done good for the people of our state and shown the rest of the country that there is a way for D's and R's to work together.
Well, there might be, but not if you're judging based on what's going on in Florida.
Yep.
Anything that you'd like to talk about before we let you go out of the Terracotta Room?
Yeah, I think we were just mentioning about clemency. I
had Desmond. I just recorded a
my boy.
podcast with Desmond 2 days ago. So you'll have to listen to that. Desmond Meade as kiddos. I just gave it away. That'll be coming out later in January.
Desmond is an inspiration.
He isn't he, though?
He is an inspiration. I have his book. He signed a copy for me, Let My People Vote. And we've done podcasts together, too. He's incredible. But I saw my role. It was interesting. So this is the first time that you have a clemency board. So for those who don't know, clemency is the process in which individuals who have had a past criminal record come through and to get pardons or to get their rights back for whether it's civil rights or voting rights or for even possession of a firearm. Or commutation if you're somebody sitting in prison still and there might be a reason for a commutation. But this is the first, and the people on the clemency board is the governor, the CFO, Attorney General, and Commissioner of Agriculture. And it's in our Constitution. It's a cabinet, and it's in the Constitution. So it is a constitutional.
And the governor has to be in favor of whatever the clemency vote is.
Correct. And so the rules have been sued upon. Rick Scott really changed the clemency rules. It went up to the Florida Supreme Court. They said that these are not judicial. You guys got to fix this. They came back. They kind of played around with some changes to it. But it is still, we have a backlog of 11,000 individuals, which is also why Amendment 4 back in 2018 was so essential, because it allowed people to get around the clemency process and just got to get their automatic voting rights back as long as they, have completed their sentence. And of course, there's the whole controversy of whether or not court costs and fees were part of that. And so, but this is the first time that you have a governor, attorney general, and commissioner of agriculture, all attorneys and all at some point involved in the criminal justice system.
Right.
He
was a prosecutor.
He was a prosecutor with the Navy.
Military.
Ashley was obviously with a judge, and she'd also been with the Middle District.
That's right.
As an assistant U.S. attorney, and then I as a past public defender. So you had an interesting scenario where you should have had three individuals who really understood the criminal justice system and understand that sometimes, in most occasions, it's not always just. And depending on, unfortunately, because I've seen this firsthand, the color of your skin or your background, you have a different outcome of your result of your cases.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Ron has moved even worse than Rick Scott. And we have given less pardons in these 4 years than Rick did in his 8 years. And he is canceled.
Which was a significant reduction from what Charlie had done. Charlie had made a kind of very easy, not automatic, but I think there was at one point like hundreds of thousands of we call them returning citizens who had their rights restored through a process that Charlie and the cabinet approved. Charlie Crist and the cabinet approved back in the day, and we have really flipped that. It is, if you ever want to have your heart broken, if you ever feel like you need a check to see if you're made of stone or not, you just tune into one of those clemency hearings. They are just heart-wrenching.
They are heart-wrenching, and watching all these people begging.
Yeah.
Begging.
You have to beg.
You have to beg. And a lot of people have waited 10 years.
You have to do more than what
a normal person would do in their everyday lives.
That's right.
And some of these cases are they were 17, 18, 19-year-old, and now they're 40, 50, 60, and they're begging, and they've waited for this 5 minutes in front of this board. Some of them have waited 10 plus years, because back when Rick was in charge, one of the changes that he did with the clemency process, he had to wait 7 years to even have applied.
Yeah.
And so we went backwards, and now he has canceled almost every clemency meeting. We have one this year, and we had, I think, 1 or 2 during COVID, because he canceled all of them during COVID. And this is one of those things that completely breaks my heart, because there's so many people that want to get back into society. And then, of course, he arrests a whole bunch of people, 20 people back, right before in August, who had voted after they thought they had their rights back. I mean, it's just a mess. And it's a shame, because that's not how our system is supposed to work. And of course, I fought for Desmond. I brought Desmond back up twice to get, out of all people.
I know.
All people, I had begged for a pardon. In the first hearing that we had, DeSantis asked him about his he had been kicked out of the military because of drug use and had a theft back then, and asked him for his military records, and you got to fix that first before you fix this, and I need to hear from your ex-wife, and all these things again that he didn't ask for other people. So we got everything cleared up. I did my due diligence. I spoke to his ex-wife. We got his military records, got all of that, and there was nothing in the military records that really showed anything. And so we brought him back, and Ron was like, you still need to fix your military record before you come here and get clemency. And he knows, Ron, out of all people, knows that the only way to fix that military record at this point is a pardon from the President of the United States.
But he did get his rights restored.
Yes, for voting, but he still can't run for office. We eventually got it taken care of, but the fact that we had to go through all of these steps.
It was a slap in the face what happened to Desmond. He was here. He had already won, I believe, the MacArthur Genius Grant.
Yes.
He was one of Time's 100 most influential people in the world. He has a law degree. He had his family, his wife and his daughter with him.
Yep.
And
he couldn't sit for the bar.
Yeah.
Because of all this.
And at the first clemency, and, everyone expected it to be just a, cruise on through the finish line. And he was rejected, and it was really kind of a stunning moment. I was stunned. Were you surprised? I guess you must have known beforehand what was going to happen, but...
And we kind of had talked about it a little bit, Desmond. I mean, we kind of knew, but he wanted to still go. And I think that, and here's where politics should not play. I have complete confidence that if I was not the one pushing, Desmond probably would have gotten it. And that's really not how this is supposed to be.
Well, Nikki Fried, thank you so much for joining us today. I don't know if it's appropriate, but we'll just do. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you'll come back and visit us again soon.
Absolutely. Be happy. I feel like we talked about so much stuff that we can spend a whole hour on each individual topic.
Thanks again, Nikki.
Thank you.
Bye.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC, and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.